Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, February 13th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, climatologist from Pennsylvania State University, author of The Hockey Stick and the Climate Wars and the Madhouse Effect, and the 2019 recipient of the Tyler Prize, Michael Mann, will be here to discuss why is it so cold if there's actually climate change. Meanwhile, the Senate passes a massive public land protection bill. Sort of shocking. And on the recession watch, a record 7 million Americans are behind in their car payments. Not good. Meanwhile, a hedge fund's real estate play will destroy local news. And the War Powers resolution to end our Yemen war support is gaining steam. Republicans realize they may have messed up on that whole health care thing. And Mitch McConnell will force a vote on the Green New Deal resolution in the Senate. Meanwhile, California Governor Gavin Newsom seems legit. Now the question is, can he execute? And back on the Hill, the Attorney General nominee William Barr advances. El Chapo, meanwhile, found guilty. No word who's going to get their Patreon account. That's all right.
I don't know how Brazil's going to do.
And as a single tear slides down Howard Schultz's face, a new HuffPost poll says only 10% of the country think the parties are too extreme. All this and more on today's Majority Report, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, folks, it is Wednesday. I should tell you that Brendan is on the board today. So
if you're wondering why it sounds so good.
If you're wondering why we've had a little upgrade in the audio mixing department, now you know. Now it's not a mystery. There it is. Matt is on a personal. It's having a personal day. I can only imagine what that is like. No, I can't. I mean, I can imagine what it's like. It's video games and
bong water sound effect.
I'm
sorry.
Oh, also today I should tell you that in the fun half, we're anticipating a phone call from a listener. We'll just use his first initial A. I was holding the line for nearly an hour today. This was yesterday, and you guys didn't take my call. I think you guys are scared of people with actual strong arguments to challenge your narrative. If you want to prove this notion wrong, then take my call next time. Well, I hope you call in today. We have your area code.
That could be about so many things.
It could, but that's the thing. It's completely. I have no idea where that. And I do appreciate the acknowledgement that we have a narrative, and so that's good. But also, you should know that in our fun half, when we take calls, we have somewhere between 10 and 30 callers on the line on any given day, and we just simply can't get to all of them.
Particularly not ones that are going to disrupt our narrative.
Right. No, actually, no. That is a brilliant way to jump the line is to send us an email and say, I want to disrupt your narrative. and give us your area code, and then that you will see that we will. Just a reminder, too, big corporations are getting rich from selling your data. Congress has completely failed to save net neutrality or protect your privacy online. Now, internet providers and mobile carriers like Comcast and Verizon are free to restrict websites, spy on your online activity, or sell your browsing history to advertisers. But with one click, ExpressVPN shields your online activity from internet and mobile providers. ExpressVPN has easy-to-use apps that run seamlessly in the background of your computer or your phone or your tablet. ExpressVPN secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data and holding your public IP address. And hiding, I should say. Get ExpressVPN protection for less than $7 a month. You can get up to all sorts of mischief with this. ExpressVPN is rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar. Comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Look, if you ever use public Wi-Fi and want to keep hackers and spies from seeing your data, ExpressVPN is the solution. I will not go on a public Wi-Fi system at all, particularly because when I'm traveling with my computer, I have sensitive stuff on the computer, not government secrets, not, I haven't taken a series of
snuff films.
Of snuff films or anything like that. But I have, I have saved bank account statements. I have maybe a picture of my license that I had to send somebody. Maybe someone can divine some things like, I don't know, my, first pet's maiden name or something that, would allow them to hack into some of the...
Your first pet's maiden name.
Yeah, I'm just using... But the point is, using a VPN and using ExpressVPN gives you protection, particularly in that context. The smart thing to do would be to use it all the time. To take back your internet privacy today, find out how you can get 3 months free. Go to expressvpn.com/majority. That's ExpressVPN, ExpressVPN.com/majority for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/majority to learn more. If you don't know about VPNs, check it out. All right, we're going to have Michael Mann on in a moment. And I don't want to say celebration, in honor of him coming on. Michael Mann has been at this for 2 decades now in terms of engaging in the political fight, often to great expense to him, frankly, and grief. And we will talk a little bit about that. And he just wrote the other day, probably the millionth column he's had to write about how when it's cold in the winter for a couple of days, that is not evidence that global warming is not happening. There is a difference between weather and climate. So in honor of that, we went into the Wayback Machine and found a time where I was significantly younger. This was 9 years ago. Almost 9 years ago to the day.
I was just out of college with an ex-girlfriend going, "Where's Keith?"
Exactly. It was December, I think, of 2010, maybe, and I was filling in hosting for Olbermann, and we did this little bit on a day where we had gotten snow, and it was quite obvious that Rush Limbaugh et al. Would be talking about how there was no more climate change. Little did I know 9 years ago that we would have a president who does exactly the same thing as we were accusing some of these other dummies from doing.
But first, we wanted to explain the technical meteorological reasons that storms like this fuel global warming denial. For that report, let's go to our countdown meteorologist, Sam Seder. Sam? Thanks, Sam. Now, this is Sunday's storm right over the Northeast, dropping more than 2 feet of snow in some regions. But then we got a high-pressure system coming in from the energy-producing states, specifically lobbying pressure that emanates from companies that stand to lose money if we actually go green. This effect is known as the Koch brothers, sometimes referred to as Los Hermanos. Now, combine that with a strong front of ignorance sweeping up from down south, and keep in mind, on their best day, you're looking at 60-65% stupidity levels down there. And that gives you a strong chance of thunder and prevarication, and it just sits right on top here and hangs there. And of course, you get that current of blustery hot air out of just one radio studio in Palm Beach, Florida, and that gust actually controls an entire stream of Republican lawmakers leading all the way up to Washington, D.C., and creating an entire system spinning counterfact-wise. Keep in mind, with the chilling factor on the mainstream media, it's going to feel several degrees stupider than it already is. So please, folks, bundle up. Back to you, Sam. Countdown meteorologist Sam Seder, thanks for that report, Sam.
I'm also seeing some type of like old Steve Carell vehicle here. It's like he's the main anchor, but he's also the weatherman.
Right, you got to
It's
run.
the same guy.
You got to run right over there during that thing.
Did you tell them you were going to do that? You just
did I tell them that I was going to do that?
Did it? I don't know.
No, I just brought my own weather map, and no, of course.
I'm impressed that they let you do that. That's all.
They helped me write it.
Oh, that's great. Good for them.
They wrote most of it, I would think.
Ari Melber wishes he could do this at the 6
It
o'clock
was
hour.
a little bit different. It was a little bit different era towards the in those first couple of years of the the Obama administration. But there it is. And sadly, not much has changed in terms of this debate. So the only difference, let me rephrase that. There is, to a large extent, I think folks on the left have moved past that, the denial, and are just trying to push it through. And it's interesting that Mitch McConnell is going to force this vote in the Senate because it's quite possible that the Democrats will not be as afraid of this as he anticipates. There are a lot of elements that are very progressive and seemingly outside of the purview of of simply fighting climate change within the Green New Deal. But that's going to be it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. Probably not in the way that McConnell hopes. Meanwhile, speaking of health, I've been on this kick for some time. One of the most important things we do for our health every day is brushing our teeth, yet most of us don't do it properly. It took me years to find this out. Quip is a better electric toothbrush created by dentists and designers. Quip was designed to make brushing your teeth more simple, affordable, and even enjoyable. With sensitive sonic vibrations, it's gentle on your sensitive gums, and the built-in 2-minute timer pulses every 30 seconds to remind you when to switch sides and guide you to a full and even clean. Better yet, Quip doesn't require a clunky charger. This is my favorite part about the Quip. It runs for 3 months on one charge. And it comes with a multi-use cover that mounts to your mirror for a less cluttered sink space. No wonder Quip is one of the first electric toothbrushes accepted by the American Dental Association. Look, the difference between the different cleaning mechanisms of an electric toothbrush are virtually irrelevant. The key is to use it all the time. And the beauty about the Quip is it is basically the size of a normal toothbrush. And so you can travel with it. You can have it on your sink and you don't have to bring it to the charger, or you don't have to have a whole like plug-in type of situation going on your sink. And it's also extremely stylish.
It's a little thing called functionality.
And look, I'm not going to get into it too much, but the point is that whole thing where you go like this, it's not the way you do it. You angle down. Once you start getting like the deep cleaning for the periodontal stuff, like you do at my age,
when you brush
believe
properly,
me,
you will never go back.
Believe me. You're going to want to take care of your teeth, and now's the time to do it. And that's why I love Quip. And that's why they're backed by over 20,000 dental professionals. Quip starts at just $25 if you go to getquip.com. quip.com/majority right now. You get your first refill pack free with a Quip electric toothbrush. Every 3 months, they send you new toothpaste and new brush head, because you're supposed to change them every 3 months, folks, but you didn't know that. You get your first refill pack free at getquip.com/majority, GETQUIP.com/majority. And also, for those of you who suffer from heartburn or acid reflux, keeps you up at night, Medcline is a new natural solution to a problem that affects thousands of Americans. Medcline is a comfortable acid reflux pillow system for your bed that keeps you in the best sleeping position for natural relief. A lot of people try and do this by just propping up pillows, whatnot. You don't have to do that. No more sliding down a wedge. No more putting blocks under your bed frame. No more dangerous medication. No more suffering. The Medcline system is available in 3 sizes. It has a patented arm pocket, so you can sleep comfortably on your side without pressure on your shoulder. The soft, supportive body pillow keeps you from rolling on your back so you can get the rest you deserve. If you're suffering with nighttime heartburn, you have to give Medcline a try tonight. With their 100-day guarantee, relief guarantee, you have nothing to lose. The system ships free with this special offer and comes complete with a full set of pillowcases. For more information, visit goodnightheartburn.com or call 800-610-1607. Enter the code MAJORITY at checkout for fast, free shipping. That's goodnightheartburn.com or call 800-610-1607. That's 610-1607 to learn more and try Medcline today. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to the great Michael Mann. Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program climatologist from Penn State University, author of The Hockey Stick and Climate Wars, and The Madhouse Effect is his most recent. He's also the 2019 Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement Award winner, Michael Mann. Michael, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Sam. Always great to talk with you.
Congrats on this Tyler Prize. I got to be honest with you. I had not heard of the Tyler Prize before, but as I read up on it, this thing is like winning the Nobel Prize for environmental. For environmental protection, I guess.
Yeah, well, they bill it as sort of the Nobel Prize for Environmental Science, and I am, truly honored and humbled to receive the award. But the real honor for me was that I shared the award this year with a personal hero of mine, Warren Washington, who is one of the first scientists decades ago to develop the sorts of climate models that we now use, frequently to look at future projections of climate change to answer all sorts of questions about human-caused climate change. And Warren Washington was really at the very forefront of that, the whole development of that science. He's also the second African-American recipient of a PhD in the country in atmospheric science. And so he's a real hero of mine, and it was an honor to share the prize with him this year.
Okay, well, let's talk about the I guess the sort of the some of the reasons why you got that award and sort of the work. You know, as I read into, I think I've interviewed you at least multiple times, and I did not realize how long you have been under assault. And I know this came up during the hockey stick and the climate wars, but maybe I just forgot about it. But there has been like a full frontal attack on you for an extended period of time, like 20 years, it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely, and sometimes I like to think maybe they picked on the wrong guy. I think the intent was to get me to shut up, to get me to back off, to get me to disappear from sort of the public space, and it's a result of this, iconic graph that my co-authors and I published literally 2 decades ago, the so-called hockey stick graph that shows how unprecedented recent warming is. It shows it's unprecedented as far back as we can go, which was 1,000 years at that time. And it became sort of an icon in the climate change debate, and it became a lightning rod for sort of industry-funded climate change deniers, fossil fuel lobbyists, and front groups whose sole, aim is to try to discredit the science of human-caused climate change because it represents an obvious threat to their bottom line. It means we can't continue to burn fossil fuels, and of course the fossil fuel industry benefits from our continued addiction to fossil fuels. So they decided that they had to try to bring down the scientific evidence for climate change, and the easy way to do that was to go after one iconic curve and one, what they assumed was a vulnerable young scientist. I was just a postdoctoral researcher at the time, but I chose to fight back, and ultimately not just to defend my research and to defend the science of climate change, but because there's such larger stakes here. We really are talking about the future of the planet for our children and grandchildren.
So and then there was lawsuits as they were attempting to get your emails, and largely it strikes me as it was just simply a way to keep you busy on some level.
Vexatious lawsuits, putting me in the hot seat at congressional hearings. I was vilified in by Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, and the right-wing media. There were pressure groups that tried to get me fired from my job. I was at the receiving end of death threats and threats against my family. So I've pretty much seen it all at this point.
Well, so let me ask you this, because I just played a clip that had occurred to me as I was reading a piece you wrote about the big freeze. We just had that huge, almost 3/4 of the nation was subject to super cold temperatures, and so I read your piece on it. It reminded me of something that I did when I filled in with Olbermann about 8 years ago, which was basically just talking about whenever you get this type of cold weather or snow, you start getting this idiocy, forgive my bluntness, about...
I think you're being kind.
Well, that assumes actually like good intent, I guess, on some level. But this attempt to say that, this proves there's no climate change. I want you to address that specific claim in a minute, but has things what has changed, from 10 years ago in terms of our collective awareness and assessment of the problem, and B, the political will to actually do something about it?
Yeah, great question. I think there are a couple of threads that are coming together, favorable threads in sort of a perfect storm, if you'll forgive the expression, of potential for climate action. And one of those is just the fact that people are seeing the impacts of climate change firsthand now. They're no longer subtle. We see them play out in real time on our television screens and our newspaper headlines: unprecedented superstorms, heat waves, droughts, floods, wildfires, everything we saw play out last summer, writ large, around the entire northern hemisphere. And meanwhile, the summer in the southern hemisphere, Australia's experiencing the worst heat that they've ever had and unprecedented floods. That is the face now of climate change, and people are getting it. And scientists like myself are doing our best to connect the dots for the people, for the media, for the public, for our elected representatives, our policymakers. And I think people are connecting the dots. I think it's grown extremely difficult for climate change deniers to deny that something is happening, much as, despite the fact that they continue to try. And Donald Trump in his Twitter feed, of course, continues to be a purveyor of sort of climate change denial talking points and myths. But I think the people get it. And so that's it. We understand climate change isn't this distant, far-off threat. It's about people losing their lives in unprecedented superstorms, Maria and Puerto Rico, the California wildfires, and something else is happening, Sam, and I think you probably have a sense of this as well. It's sort of the way young folks are reasserting themselves in our public discourse, in our social discourse, in our political dialogue. We're hearing the voice of younger people weigh in on the matters that are important to them, whether it be gun control or now climate change. And you've got these kids around the world now who are engaged in these school strikes to draw attention to climate change, and they just speak with such clarity and moral authority that only the most hardened cynic cannot be willing to listen to what they're saying. And I think that's a game changer. I think it's changing the conversation. I think all these things are coming together. And of course, with Democrats now taking back the House of Representatives, there's an opportunity now politically for us to actually see climate legislation. It may not be able to pass the Senate now, who knows, 2 years from now, but we're going to see the groundwork laid now by Democrats in the House, and maybe some Republicans who are willing to work with them to get climate change back on the political agenda.
I think we could definitely track the center of the Republican Party for a second. And the reason why I focus so much on the Republican Party in this is that I think they're the only major political party in the world that has a climate change denial as like a campaign plank and
part of their platform. Yeah, absolutely.
It seems that they have moved at least from total denial of it as a phenomena, but are still sort of dancing around with the idea that it's not man-made, and then to the extent that it is, there's nothing we can do about it.
Right. The only consistency in the various arguments that they put forward is that they're an excuse for inaction, right? There's otherwise no intellectual consistency. It's either it's not happening to it's happening, but it's not us. All right, maybe it's us, but it's happened, but it's not bad. And then finally, sort of the ultimate stage in our book, The Madhouse Effect, Tom Towles, Washington Post cartoonist, has a beautiful cartoon. We talk about the ladder of climate change denial as they sort of go down the rungs from it's not happening to it's happening, but it's not us. And eventually you get to, well, you know what? There's nothing we can do about it. And that's not true either.
All right. Well, let's talk about let's talk just a little bit about some of the problem. Then we'll move on to what we can do about it, because there is a, like you say, the youth ultimately, and is starting to bring sort of suggestions to the fore. But I just want to talk about two things. One, let's talk about the that polar. I'm not sure what you call it, but we had 3/4 of the country with temperatures that were either at records or near record lows. For a couple of days. It was bizarre. And then within like 2 days in New York, it was 60 degrees, which is also a strange thing to experience in the middle of February.
Yeah, right. We got weather whiplash, right? Extremes on both sides. And here's the thing. It felt like record cold to us. I mean, I think you and I are probably of similar sort of vintage. I grew up, I remember these really cold, snowy winters in the early 70s in New England where I grew up.
Blizzard of 78. I was out of school for 3 weeks.
There
3
you
or 4
are.
weeks,
No, I mean,
I think.
And of course, when I was a little kid, I mean, the snow would come up to my, my head, and part of that is just I was shorter. But no, we had these really cold, snowy winters, and I call that old-fashioned cold. Old-fashioned only in the sense that you have to go back to our youth to see it. And millennials and folks who are younger than that just haven't seen it. They've grown up in a world that just did not see those sorts of old-fashioned winters. So then when you're confronted with something like this cold air outbreak, the Arctic, the polar vortex breakdown, and these very cold conditions we saw a few weeks ago, it feels like it's unprecedented cold, only because it's unprecedented in a few decades.
Right.
That's how profound climate change is. That sort of cold has become so rare that we think it's record cold, when in fact it isn't. And Donald Trump, of course, exploited that by claiming we were breaking cold records. Here's the thing. That week, there were actually 2 locations in the world, both of them, I think in Minnesota or Wisconsin, 2 small towns, or no, maybe Illinois. There were 2 towns that set all-time lows. In the entire world, there were 2 towns that actually set all-time lows. Chicago, none of the major cities did. And in that same month, the first month of this year, when we saw those 2 record lows, we saw 35 record highs elsewhere in the world, where the Southern Hemisphere, Australia, South America, baking through a record warm summer for them. And so, no, we're not seeing an increase in record cold. We're just seeing some of this old-fashioned cold. And here's the kicker. There may even be a climate change connection there, as you know, because one of the things we're increasingly convinced that the fact that the Arctic is warming faster than the rest of the planet is actually because it decreases the contrast in how cold it gets when you go from the equator to the polar regions. It's that temperature contrast that drives the jet stream in the polar vortex. So when you warm the Arctic more than the rest of the planet, you actually slow down this jet stream, and you slow down the polar vortex, and you allow for these sort of polar vortex breakdown events where the cold air that's normally bottled up in the Arctic can escape down into the United States or Europe, which is what we're seeing. It's not giving us record cold, but it's giving us some of that old-fashioned cold.
How much like new dynamics do we find as time goes on? In other words, like like everything else, I guess. I mean, it was just a report that a couple of days ago that we are headed to a mass extinction of insects for the most part. A couple are doing better because of what's going on, and that it's not all a function of climate change. Climate change seems to be one factor. Another factor seems to be these new forms of pesticides and herbicides. But you see, but we're talking about it's very hard to predict, right? Like if the number of a certain type of grasshopper drops below a certain critical mass, we don't necessarily know all the potential implications for our ecospheres and whatnot.
That's right.
And I imagine it's the same thing with climate change. How many new sort of dynamics are we observing? Because it seems like every 6 months we're like, wow, the rate of the warming of the oceans is actually goes beyond what our models predicted. How many of those sort of crop up along the way?
Yeah, and with the ecosystems, animal populations and plants, we say that these relationships are nonlinear. It means that there's a very complex interrelationship between the different sort of species in our ecosystem, and that makes it very difficult to predict. When you lose one species, it can have reverberations through the entire ecosystem, through the entire food chain, and so that's a real worry that we can have these impacts now, global scale impacts on our environment, where the potential implications are extremely difficult to predict accurately, even with our best models. And so, the lesson there is that uncertainty is not our friend. You often hear uncertainty cited by the critics as if it's reason for inaction. Oh, well, there's uncertainty in the science. Well, if anything, as we learn more, and as you're alluding to, as we learn more about the science, we're finding that the uncertainty is sort of not breaking in our favor, it's breaking against us. We're finding that things can happen faster, and there are things that can happen that we didn't envision happening. And we're seeing that with the melting of the ice sheets, which is happening faster than we expected, meaning that it's contributing to sea level rise faster than we expected. And that has to do with some of the physics of ice sheets behavior that just wasn't in our previous models. And when you put them into the models, suddenly you find that, hey, the West Antarctic ice sheet can collapse much more quickly than we thought. And that can lead to sea level rise much more quickly than we thought. And that's true, for example, for the relationship between climate change and extreme weather. And some of my own research deals with that connection. And we're finding that there's some subtle ways that, we just alluded to. If you change temperatures, you can change the jet stream. You can change the jet stream in a way where you get these very large weather systems that remain stuck in place, like we saw last summer with this, very hot air drought, high pressure over California, giving them unprecedented wildfire, where back east we had an unprecedented sort of low pressure system which gave us the wettest summer on record. And so, that's difficult to predict. The models didn't see that coming. These changes in the behavior of the jet stream may be leading to even more extreme persistent weather events than our models were able to predict, just a few years ago.
Let's sort of pivot towards solutions, but before we get there was just a report that came out from NASA, which I imagine you might be aware of, but the Jet Propulsion Laboratory confirmed that the oil and gas industry is responsible for the largest share of the world's rising methane emissions. I guess this was somewhat of a mystery. And I'm not quite sure how NASA necessarily goes about determining that, but NASA is one of those outfits apparently that gets paid regardless of what they find out about methane leaks, they're not necessarily. It's not necessarily a motivated finding. What is the low-hanging fruit? Is there a low-hanging fruit when we start to talk about solutions? Or at least mitigation of the impact of climate change? Because it feels like all the fruit seems to be, frankly, fairly high up the tree, and we're going to have to do something drastic.
Yeah, so, and I'm glad you mentioned NASA because, you talk about it. What's an unimpeachable source of scientific information in our nation still? That people, even the most hardened contrarians and conservatives tend to respect, the space program and NASA, and it's played this amazingly important role in the history of science and technology in this country. And so people listen when NASA says something in a way that they might not listen to other sources. And NASA just, doesn't have an agenda. They're just looking at the numbers. They are able to make interesting measurements because they use what's known as remote sensing, satellite-based observations. And this has become increasingly important in observing the Earth system. So you can use these satellite observations to actually look at, emissions of carbon. And so that's the connection here that, even NASA is saying that, hey, we're seeing an uptick in these methane levels. We think that's coming from natural gas. Fracking, hydraulic fracturing. When you try to get at that natural gas, they inject fluids into the bedrock that breaks it up, and some of that gas escapes through holes in the surface. And we call it fugitive methane emissions, like it's trying to escape. Well, that's what it's doing. And the methane escapes into the atmosphere, and it's a very potent greenhouse gas, so that's adding to the warming. So we think that natural gas, the advocates used to say, well, you produce less CO2 when you burn natural gas for power versus coal. And that's true, but you also some of that natural gas escapes into the atmosphere. Some of that methane escapes into the atmosphere. So low-hanging fruit, well, some of it is just common sense regulations to make sure that natural gas recovery is done in a way that attempts to prevent the release of methane. And under the Obama administration, we had executive policies. The EPA had policies now to try to limit those methane emissions from natural gas. Of course, one of the first things that the Trump administration did was to try to eliminate those basic protections. So the low-hanging fruit, the easiest thing is keep the protections that were already in place there. And we have an administration right now that's trying to undo all of the environmental protections of the last half century. But on top of that, there are a lot of things that we can do in our everyday lives that save us money. They make us feel better. They're healthier, and they reduce our carbon emissions. Bicycling rather than driving, using more fuel-efficient vehicles or public transportation, or more efficient appliances, changing your diet in a way that's carbon-friendly. There's so many things that we can do that are good for us, and they reduce our carbon emissions. That's the low-hanging fruit. We call it no regrets. Hey, it has a negative cost. It's a benefit just to do it, and we ought to be doing it anyways. But to get the sorts of carbon emission reductions we need to avert catastrophic warming, we're going to have to go further than that. And that's going to require that there be a price on carbon that we've got, and incentives for renewable energy. We've got to level the playing field so that forms of energy that aren't destroying the planet, renewable energy, can compete fairly against fossil fuel energy, which currently, under the current administration, is getting all sorts of subsidies. It's interesting that conservatives often complain about, the government picking winners and losers. They did that when the Obama administration was trying to push us in the direction we need to go with renewable energy. Well, here we've got the Trump administration trying to prop up the failing coal industry.
Well, I mean, look, from my perspective, there's no such thing as a government that does not pick winners and losers. It's really just,
right.
I mean, that's just the nature of society, frankly. And
right.
the question is
right.
just like who's going to decide who those winners and losers are, and what's that decision
right.
going to be? And the sort of the personal responsibilities part of it aside, that's not I think that's going to make people feel good. But at the end of the day, we need a robust government, societal, and frankly international, response to this. And
absolutely.
And leveling the playing field, I'm not even sure will get us there either, right? I mean, we need to sort of aggressively, in the same way that we said, let's build an interstate highway system. Let's subsidize corn so that we can basically set up factory farms. As we did 40, 50 years ago.
Right.
We need to have, or for that matter, like our response to World War II.
Let's mobilization.
Let's convert
nationwide mobilization.
Let's convert our capacity to build weapons. Obviously, I'm not advocating a war of that sort, but metaphorically speaking, we did that. We made a massive shift in the entire economy in the matter of months. It feels like we need to do that.
Well, that's the impetus behind the now well-known Green New Deal, right? That AOC is favoring, along with some of her co-sponsors and supporters in the Senate, Ed Markey of Massachusetts, and a number of others. That is the principle at work here. We need the equivalent of an Apollo project focused on transitioning our energy system away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And so you're absolutely right. I would say that those mechanisms aren't incompatible. If we put a price on carbon, if we introduce explicit incentives for renewable energy, we're going to accelerate this natural transition that's already taking place. I mean, solar and wind, soon enough, just left to their own accord, are going to become cheaper, more efficient than renewable energy. It's inevitable. What we need to do is speed up that transition so it's fast enough to avert catastrophic warming of the planet. And to do that, there are are market mechanisms that you can use to do that, and that's the incentive, subsidies for renewable energy or a price on carbon. That's where that comes in. But then there are all these other things that you can do to try to help transition society along in the direction we need to go. And so it requires a major mobilization. And I think that the Green New Deal, whether or not something that looks like it gets passed, it's a wonderful starting point, and it gets climate change right at the center of our agenda going into this next legislative term.
What from a policy perspective? I mean, and this may be somewhat outside your portfolio, right? I mean, you can you can tell us it's going to rain, but you're not necessarily choosing which umbrella, I guess, right? Like, I mean,
I can't even tell you if it's going to rain.
Well, no, but I'm saying just you're indicating that we have a problem, and the solution it seems like is once you get past the amount of carbon that needs to be essentially prevented from entering the atmosphere, how you go about that is, it seems to me, or from your perspective, is it strictly a political decision? Like, are there, like, do we it seems to me we have like a fairly wide array of technical or technological responses to this problem. It's just a political decision as to which one we choose.
Exactly. I mean, we have the technology necessary to solve this problem. But, we don't need a miracle, as people like Bill Gates like to say. We don't need a miracle. The miracle's already happened. It's called renewable energy. It's wind. It's solar. It's everything else. We've got the technology to do this. It's simply a matter of how much incentives we provide to move us in that direction and to scale that up rapidly. And so that's a matter for legitimate political debate. How do you do it? Do you do it with explicit subsidies for renewable energy? Do you do it with a price on carbon, or both of those things? And if it's a price on carbon, is it tradable emissions, cap and trade, or is it a carbon tax? And if it's a carbon tax, is it a revenue neutral carbon tax that some conservatives have actually gotten behind? That's a worthy political debate to have. That's the debate we ought to have been having. We should have been having, over the last 2 years when Republicans controlled the House of Representatives, and we haven't been having that. I think that is the discussion we're having now, and there have already been a couple hearings, one that happened today in the House of Representatives on climate change and climate policy. And the tenor of the discussion, it's refreshing. It's so different from, when I testified back in 2017 to Lamar Smith, the House Science Committee chair. He held a hearing to try to discredit the science of climate change, and he's the chair of the House Science Committee. Today we've got a House Science Committee in the House of Representatives that is pro-science and that wants to have the meaningful conversation that we're talking about here. So I think we're going to see that happen over the next couple of years. Again, we might not be at a point where we can see legislation pass the Senate, but with some small changes in the makeup of the Senate, we could potentially see an environment where we could actually have climate legislation emerge out of Congress in the relatively near future. I don't think we can rule that out.
This may be a sort of a silly question to ask, and one maybe that you can't answer, but I know that there is sort of a broad consensus in the scientific community, at least that is, I guess, related to lay people, about how little time we have to act on this. Yeah. When you're sitting around at these conferences, or when you go to a conference, or when you're with your colleagues, are you guys basically throwing out another number that is actually worse? I mean, how does it get? How dark does it get when you talk to your colleagues?
Yeah, no, I would say that we're pretty good. If you look at the National Climate Assessment Report that was put out this fall, which the Trump administration tried to bury on Black Friday, and it ended up commanding even more attention for it, ironically. That report...
We should say, just so that people know what this report is, that's like what? Like almost a dozen U.S. government agencies that obviously they're not making their boss happy. But they are tasked with putting out this information, and so that's a broad assessment of the U.S. government.
Right, and the president is congressionally required to put out the report, and so they try to put it out on the day they thought it would help bury it, and that didn't happen. And I think because the message was so clear, and the IPCC report, the special report about what it would take to limit warming below dangerous levels of 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius. That's 3.5 Fahrenheit warming of the planet, and a pretty sobering report. And it actually is the basis of this talking point, this sort of assertion that we've heard a lot about lately, including AOC made this statement that we only have 12 years left, before basically we commit ourselves to disastrous climate change, and it's true. So that's a pretty alarming talking point, right? That's a pretty alarming statement, and it even though it sort of came out of the mouth of AOC and she was vilified by her conservative critics for it, it turns out that that's essentially what the IPCC said. They said we've got 12 years in order to bring our carbon emissions down rapidly enough to avoid crossing those dangerous thresholds of 2 degrees Celsius, 3.5 Fahrenheit warming of the planet, where we see the worst impacts of climate change. So, no, I don't think the scientists are holding back. And if you read the National Climate Assessment Report, it really uses some pretty striking language in describing the devastating impact, not that climate change will have in the future, that climate change is having already. Right. So I don't think the scientific community in general is holding back. What is happening is there's still some inability for us to get our message out through the mainstream media.
And we should say there's no going backwards, right? There's no we hit a certain temperature and then we get smart enough about this and we can go backwards. That's it, right?
Once we start to melt the great ice sheets, the Greenland ice sheet and the West Antarctic ice sheet, there's no going back. We could try to dial the CO2 back down, dial the warming back down. That doesn't stop. That continues. And so that's what's so terrifying, frankly, about the prospect of climate inaction, is that we commit to long-term changes that are irreversible on human timescales, on societal timescales, in a matter of years now if we don't act.
Right. That is one of, the key flaws in human imagination, is that we're making decisions. We made decisions 20 years ago that sort of sealed the deal for at least certain problems that we have now.
That's right.
And
that's right.
We don't necessarily have the ability. It takes a certain amount of, maturity on some level to sort of view the future. But
right, not what we have in the White House right now.
No, not even close. Michael Mann, congratulations again on the Tyler Prize, and thank you so much for joining us. We will put links to your books at MajorityReportRadio.com. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Sam. Always a pleasure.
All right, folks. Boy. On some level, it's like the teeth brushing. You don't brush your teeth today, you're in your 20s or your 30s. Guys, you're not going to realize you made a bad mistake for about 20 years. And then you can't go backwards. You can't go backwards.
Jeez. These are always so depressing. But I'm not going to say the whole thing of what I think about the policy prescriptions in the interview. I would only urge people to go to wearemany.org and click on the environment tag if you want to hear some lectures from Marxists on the issue of climate change.
Nevertheless, whatever those policy prescriptions ultimately end up being, it's going to take an awareness and an acceptance by our political class.
You know what my honest response to that interview is? I don't buy the climate scam. Totally a lie. And I'm going to go enjoy myself.
It's definitely worth reading both the Hockey Stick and Climate Wars and the Madhouse Effect. He has been literally under siege for decades. trying to get the word out. And he's one of the few scientists. There's some, but, scientists are not, it's very difficult for scientists to compete with tens of millions of dollars of public relations disinformation that is put out. I mean, this is the same dynamic that we had with tobacco for a long time in this country. All right, going to take a break, head into the fun half of the program. The number is 646-257-3920. 646-257-3920 is the number wherein we will take your calls. If you're out there listening, call in now.
Call in today, because Sam likes that. I don't do that narrative disrupting crap on my Thursday. Yeah, do not call tomorrow. I have
don't
no
call tomorrow.
For that. It's nonsense.
It is. We have a specific line open for any narrative disruptors. Narrative disruptors. We've cleared all the West Coast and East Coast lines for you.
I'm barely interested in narrative affirming calls.
I'm not interested in narrative affirmative calls at all.
I know.
If we had 30 calls stacked up who just wanted to tell me how wrong I was, it would be the happiest day of my life.
It'd be a nightmare. We'd never get out of here.
It's true. We would have the longest show.
First the water regulation, and now an IQ call. Oh my God!
You know what?
Maybe that's what I'll do. And just go till 7.
You were on the show when I did the 12-hour show, right, Michael? Oh, you weren't. Okay, so we did a 12-hour show. And it was me. I can't remember. I think old Matt was here, and at one point he went home, went to bed. I think, I'm not sure, but I feel like I could do a 24-hour show if I could just get enough callers to disagree with me. I feel like it would just fly by.
And everybody else would definitely. That would be our flight attendants moment. Just look, if you want to go on this reckless path, that's fine.
Oh, I have no problem doing shifts, doing shifts, and then being here, at 3 in the morning, just looking around.
Go to their meeting.
Fine with
I'll
me.
just be at a certain point. I'll be like, look, I'm really tired.
I'll just run to the bathroom and just like
free Lula. All right, Sam's coming back to take another idiotic call. Lula Livre. I'm gonna take a nap.
I mean, as long as I get to talk about capitalism, I'll be happy.
That's what I figured. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support to exist. You can become a member for just pennies. I mean, it would be annoying to carry around that many pennies, but dimes would be an easy task to carry around the dimes per day that it would take to support this program. Head over to jointhemajorityreport.com. Become a member. We give you extra content. Next week, in fact, next week we're going to go on a break. It's going to be all new interviews, and we've got some really, really good ones. And Brendan is going to head into the deep archives and pick out stuff that he is interested in, stuff that like how old were you when I'm talking deep archives. I'm talking Air America archives.
03, 04, 05, 06.
04 to like 07.
Ooh.
How old were you then? Were you like junior high?
Yeah. I was 12 years old.
He was Brendan wasn't even allowed. Let's go to the ball game.
I was playing baseball.
Brendan was not allowed to listen to the radio. He was so young.
I actually did listen to a lot of radio when I was a kid.
All right.
But it was mostly like 10-10 Wins and then like Steve Summers.
How did you not listen to Air America?
I
didn't know what channel that was. I'm just AM radio in New Jersey.
I'm picturing them on a car ride.
It was, you knew 10-10 Wins.
Brendan.
It's like the main AM station.
Right. Brendan's on like a car ride to go see a Mets game. And then all of a sudden, you just accidentally flip it. You just hear like, well, it would stipulate that what the Bush administration is doing. And Brendan's just like, hey, Dad, geez, will you turn the channel? I want to go to the ball game.
I think that happens with a lot of our listeners right now, frankly. Anyways, members will have access to those deep archive shows that Brendan chooses for next week. So join themajorityreport.com. Also, justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY. Today is Wednesday. Last night, Tuesday. Michael, what happened here?
What happened was the great Mark Blythe talked about decarbonizing the economy, the Green New Deal, Trump's dual populism pivot, a whole bunch of stuff. Long block on Brazil and how it relates, the kind of synchronizing of a new effort to destroy the Brazilian pension system and Wall Street investment, and how this has to do with a new deployment of violence in the favelas. In the post game, we told you exactly how to understand the Ilhan Omar scandal and the Amy Klobuchar scandal, or I don't want to say Ilhan Omar scandal, Ilhan Omar debate and freak out people are having. And also Sam Harris. He has a very dumb idea about 2020, and I invite you to consider the possibility that if he knows this little about politics, maybe he's not quite as sharp on his...
What was his idea?
He's like, I think what the Democrats need is sort of like a younger Michael Bloomberg candidate, which I love. As I pointed out in this segment, I mean, and we'll actually probably clip
like
this.
Tom
one.
Steyer?
No, Tom Steyer would be too progressive for him. But what I like about it is that it's both not supported by any empirical data, and this is supposed to be like the empirical
Howard
thing.
Schultz?
Right. I mean, that actually would be like he's literally just not reading the headlines enough. He should be supporting
Howard Schultz.
No, Howard
is
Schultz would
just
be the
like,
guy.
well, he's 5 years too old.
Or
he's 5 years too old. Well,
if he wants to be strategic about it, Joe Biden.
No.
Well,
No.
Joe Biden's
Too
not.
left?
No, Joe Biden's not a billionaire.
Yeah, he's not a billionaire with
or
business
younger than
experience.
Bloomberg.
Or younger than Bloomberg.
But Schultz is a billionaire who's younger than Bloomberg.
He's not. Well, as I pointed out, though, I didn't make the Schultz connection, but as I pointed out, it wouldn't be a proper Sam Harris segment if there wasn't at least a part of it that wasn't totally just imagined.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it would be like if he just said, I support Michael Bloomberg, or I like what Howard, I like the noises. It's like that would be too much in this realm.
Well,
so
no, the problem with that is that you could actually address what he was saying.
Right.
But if he says like Bloomberg, but impossible to pin down in terms of what I really want.
Oh, well, there's a whole, oh my God, there's a whole bunch of stuff in that. Anyways, it's patreon.com/TMBS. I will say also, just real quick, we're 13 away from our next goal, which is our first 2,000 patrons. So thanks everybody who's keeping the momentum going. And patrons know this, and it will be announced really soon. But the next TMBS live show is in LA, April 20th, 420, with Waz, Anna Kasparian, and Nando Vila. Yes.
Okay. I hope you're flying in Jimmy Reefer cake.
I can really
Jamie.
tell you that that's not happening.
It's a long way to go.
Oh, man. So this week on the Antifada, in our bonus released on Monday, Andy speaks with Murray Bookchin scholar Blair Taylor at Puerto Vallarta Bear Weekend about Murray Bookchin's political evolution from being an influential anarchist to something of a post-anarchist thinker. His Institute for Social Ecology that Blair currently runs, all kinds of good stuff. And then today, we just dropped our free episode featuring the always amazing Corey Pine, in which we talk to him about Silicon Valley, the book that he wrote, super good, Live, Work, 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 Die. We talk about the over-under on Big Bezos hog reveal, the dark powers that our new tech overlords hold over our lives, and how we must fight back against them.
And Brendan, how's your day?
Literary hangover. You go to patreon.com. We're talking about, I don't know.
Can you do the impression?
Of Matt?
Yeah.
The literary hangover. Crucible.
All right. You take a quick break.
It's
Head into the fun half.
What was the actual Patreon?
I don't know.
It's let me just say it because I feel bad.
Patreon.com/literary hangover.
Check the podcast description.
Okay.
All right, heading into the fun half. 646.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious. you could imagine.
The alpha males are back, 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 back. And the alpha males are back, 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 back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back, back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back, 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 back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back, 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 back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back, back, back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danergy's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danergy.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck them. Fuck them.
Almost says what?
Almost
says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back, 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 back. And the Africans are black, 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 black African. And the alpha males are back, 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 back. And the Africans are black, 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 black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Fuck 'em. Fuck things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black. Alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black.
Come on! Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
That dude did not call in. Yeah, take the time to send us an email and get all uptight about not getting the call, and then you don't call in. That's very annoying.
I have a narrative
only
about
1
that
o'clock.
guy now.
Oh,
which is that he's a coward.
Meanwhile,
sad.
Brandon Straka is, I guess, mad that we. In what context did we talk about him
We
again?
devoted another whole episode to talking about him.
How many episodes could we
We're
do?
in love with him.
I want to talk about
what
him
was what? Honestly, what did we talk about him in?
Initially?
No, just was it
he's
recently?
The fact that we're terrified of
That
him
he's
taking,
primarying.
He's going to take AOC.
Oh, he's yeah, well, I thought he
primarying our queen.
Wait a second. He announces that he's going to...
or no, not primarying. General electioning.
Well, he announces that he's entering the election, and he faults us for mentioning that? That's a very odd strategy for your campaign.
A common candidate tactic.
Don't you dare talk
like,
about
I
me
announced my candidacy. Keep your mouth shut in media.
Keep very quiet about it. But so apparently it got him very, very upset. And it's weird. This didn't show up in my timeline. Did I? I don't think I muted him. I wouldn't be able to see it now, would I? If I.
It came out this morning at
Wait.
1:40 a.m.
What's the dude doing at 1:41 a.m.? He's going around Googling himself or something? Is that what's happening?
I mean, that's maybe the most relatable thing about him.
This is a guy who really needs to get, I guess, maybe a job where he has to be somewhere in the morning. But nevertheless, so Sam Seder and his team of crime-fighting grammarians
He's asking
dedicated
for it.
a fifth losing count episode of his show to talking about me. That is a lot. To do 5 full episodes on him it seems to be a little bit over.
I do want to host
the Straka
like
Report
Michael
with
Mann
Sam Seder
or Milton Alamati, and just be like, like Milton, I promised on a Thursday we'd talk about the new developments in southern Sudan due to the Trump administration's pullback from global diplomacy. But really, actually, have you heard of this guy, Brendan Straka?
Well, now, all right, so let me finish. I've always had a soft spot for a nerdy guy with an obsession for me, but I think Sam's wish for...
That was good. Brendan.
For his own daughter to be raped is a kind of deal breaker. And, of course, he's referring to...
bad form, Brendan.
We've got to... and, of course, he posts the tweet that I put out in 2009 in response to people who were apologizing for Roman Polanski's statutory rape of a girl that he then was supposed to make a plea deal for and then skipped the country, wherein I wrote, "Don't care about Polanski, but I do hope if my daughter's ever raped, it's by an older, truly talented man with a great sense of mise-en-scène," which many people, in fact, Mike Cernovich, one of Brandon Straka's forebearers, tried to make an issue of, got me fired from MSNBC, then got me rehired from MSNBC in one of the more enjoyable periods, actually, of certainly of 2017. But
your life,
my life,
soft pedal
my
it.
adult life. So in honor of Brandon Straka, being concerned that we have done a 6th episode of our show talking about him, we're going to make it 7. We're going to release the debate. We've had it behind a paywall, but instead, in celebration of his candidacy, where he is going to be running against AOC in 2020, because he's the only New Yorker who can take her on. We're going to release that debate to all of the world so they can watch.
And we will be doing
because his
running
channel
coverage.
Oddly enough, for the millions of people who are in the walk away movement, I think that he only got like 3,000 or 4,000 hits on that video, I think. So I think maybe he needs to get a signal boost. And so you're welcome, Brandon.
Cut to AOC headquarters.
How could he do this?
What is he doing? God damn it. In the same week we put out the Green New Deal. Guys, the Boston College dancing video was nothing, but Brendan Straka is everything. He'll foil our whole plans to turn America into a giant compost collective.
I mean, are there going to be any voters, though, to vote for her by 2020? Because all are going to have walked away, aren't they?
Yeah,
I guess we'll see.
Is that the plan?
Yeah, but he should have done a little Google research on how the last time.
I think it was the best that he could do. He must have, 141.
The first was the best he could do was the nerdy guys who are obsessed with me line. That was fun.
Yeah, that was good.
He should have finished. He should have finished it right there. This is pretty good. And do we have that list of donor states? Do we have a graphic for that? Okay. So let's go with this. This was pretty amusing on Fox and Friends. How are they going to deal with the reports out? I mean, look, we know the initial reports in terms of the Republican tax scam, wherein they basically just gave wealthy people a huge bonus in terms of tax cuts. There was massive tax cuts for offshored profits. That money came back, and of course it went into the hands of shareholders. We know that 84% of stocks are owned by 10% of the country's population. Despite the fact that Charlie Kirk would have you believe otherwise, I actually recently contacted the author of that study, and he says it has nothing to do except for households. So, but that's for another day. So Fox and Friends,
like
it was definitely very petty of me to do it. Fox and Friends tried to deal with what a lot of people are finding out is that they did not get their tax returns. or they do not get a tax refund that they had anticipated. Here's they're trying to slough it off, and then they move into the territory where state and local taxes are no longer fully deductible, which was intended to put pressure on blue states that actually collect taxes from its inhabitants to provide them with services. And here's how that went.
Well, taxpayers are complaining as the average tax refund drops an average 8% from last year. But are you actually making less money?
Here to break it all down for you and what it means for your wallet, Charles Payne, host of Making Money with Charles Payne on the Fox Business Network. So, Charles, people look forward to their tax refund.
I've never seen his show. His whole show is about basically just come up with some type of just pick up an ability to recite right-wing talking points, and that's how you can make money. Is that more or less what the? It's like one of those. When I was a kid, like you could find in like comic books, like you can make money selling money-making secrets, and you would buy it, and it would be basically telling you just to do what they just did to you.
Yeah, only this one you actually do make money.
Oh, here we go.
And getting back the money that they overpaid to the federal government.
Exactly. Here's the thing is, for the most part, the IRS is telling everyone that they just simply did not make the proper adjustments on their withholdings at the beginning of the year. So they've been making all of this money.
It's an IRS mistake.
Well, it's not necessarily their mistake. Employer. It's your employer or you. IRS actually put a lot of memos out. They even made it pretty easy to go on their website and figure it out. This is at the beginning of last year. Mm-hmm. Of course, most people didn't do that. So while people were obviously seeing fatter paychecks, they were still counting on that refund that they always got, which is interesting because you kind of hinted at it, that we would allow, the IRS to have like a $2,000 loan, our money, right? Hold on to it. Yeah, because we overpay. So people probably should consider making these adjustments anyway, unless you want to give the IRS $2 or $3 grand of your money to hold for a year. Maybe they can make the interest on it and you won't.
But here's the problem. There's certain things that have gone forever, and that is in these blue states, in Illinois, in New York, as well as Los Angeles, New Jersey, still Los Angeles, as well as California, you can no longer write off state and local taxes.
Well, there's limits, right? With the SALT, the
10,000.
Yeah, right.
So
up
that's
to
gone.
That's gone. That's gone. And a lot of these states are complaining. And listen,
that's why Governor Cuomo was meeting with the president yesterday.
That's why he was meeting with the president. But, these states have put themselves in a bad predicament because they have taxed their residents. They've created these obligations. They've made these promises. And they need to find out some of the taxes that they can probably address rather than, going back to.
Incidentally, those promises are things like health care, or decent education, or good roads.
Public transportation.
Maybe food support, Medicaid support, promises like that.
Government and asking someone in Mississippi, to subsidize a millionaire in New York City to subsidize their mortgage. It's ridiculous.
New York State should run more like Texas or run more like Florida.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, that brings up a good point about subsidizing people across state lines. Can we bring up that chart on just who are donor states and who are not? Let's see. What did they say? Here we go. New York. Let's go down to New York here. We have New York. Wow, that is 50. All right, you got to pull it up here because I can't see which those two go all the way up, just so I can see what share of state spending, federal grants, and the share of state spending. I'm not sure how that. Let's see. Okay, grants that go down. Well, there are donor states. That's not the right one. But the fact of the matter is that we've got. Let's pull up the donor states things here. Hold on. Thought we had that. The 5 least dependent states. Ducey mentioned New Jersey. New Jerseyans receive only 0.48 cents back for every dollar they pay in income tax. Delaware, Illinois, mentioned also by Ducey. Minnesota, Kansas, New Mexico. Here we go. These are the least dependent on the 5 most dependent states would be New Mexico, Mississippi, Kentucky, Alabama. Didn't that guy actually say Mississippi? And Montana. The least dependent would be New Jersey, Delaware, Illinois, Minnesota, and Kansas. There you go. What's surprising about Kansas?
Kansas surprises me.
Oh, this is 2015 that I'm looking at. That's part of the problem. I have a feeling Kansas has moved on down the list quite a bit.
Hard to imagine.
But there you go. That's absurd. And the idea that New York doesn't put back into the federal government more than it takes out. And so it's not really subsidizing across state lines. It really is just a question of we have local services subsidizing billionaires' tax cuts and corporate tax cuts. That's basically what it comes down to. Let's go to, here's, this is a funny clip with Adnan Girdadis. Which one is which here? We have two of them. Are we going to play both? Yeah, let's play both. Do the first one first. So apparently Stephanie Ruhle and Anand Girdadis got into a Twitter exchange. And it's sort of fascinating to watch this, sort of as there is this real, I don't know if I would say compulsion by certain members of the media, probably across the, outside the media too, to a certain extent, but of course we see it in the media, to protect, I guess, the reputations of billionaires. Like, I'm not quite sure what is the compulsion here, but maybe it's just some sense of trying to justify their broader perspective. I'm not sure. I mean, Stephanie Ruhle seems somewhat sincere here, but I'm not sure.
They're handmaids to power.
Yeah, I guess so, but they're not all like this. But it seems actually like it's almost touching, like naively like touching. But here.
I hear you, but I want to share sort of the tweet that started this conversation between you and I. It's from former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, who wrote, "Anyone who has $1 billion either exploited a monopoly that should have been broken up, got inside information unavailable to other investors, bribed some politicians, or inherited the money from their parents who did one of the above." Here's my issue with this argument. Hate the game, not the player. If the argument is, if you became that rich, you must be some crooked criminal.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, pause.
That is a game critique tweet.
Well,
it is.
Yes. The point is, in fact, he doesn't say that any of them are crooked criminal necessarily. There's one or two, I think, of that list of 4 or 5 that Reich read off.
He's not saying they're bad people, right?
Well, look, exploiting a monopoly very well may be legal in this. It's perfectly legal in the context of our society. We had a whole conversation yesterday why monopolies are problematic. Inheriting money isn't necessarily make you a bad person. It is problematic with the system. Bribing politicians, I don't think Reich meant that literally. I think it was like campaign finance donations, which the Supreme Court has said legal. I can't remember what the second one was, but it wasn't basically going and mugging old ladies. Here, go ahead.
Possibly that rich, you must be some crooked criminal. How are we possibly going to get people, how are we going to get that powerful class to the table to be self-reflective, to say, let's make sure the world doesn't crumble beneath me and make things better? If we're strictly demonizing the super rich, why on earth would they do anything but build a higher wall around their houses?
I don't think that's actually about demonizing. And I think that this is an argument
Hold on, it's not demonizing.
No, let me explain why. Let me explain why. If you were a man in 1900, you could be a good man or you could be a bad man. But there was no man in 1900 who didn't benefit from the systemic exclusion and persecution of women in every job that those women couldn't compete for. The fact that women couldn't vote for public policies that would be better for half the country, etc.
Amen to that.
There were good men and bad men in that regime, but all of them benefited from an unfair system, right? So the argument there is not that all of those men were crooks or who was not. And I don't want to get into, I have gotten to know through my reporting a lot of billionaires. This is never, and I say this again and again, not a matter of individual morality. This is about an immoral system, and a system that prioritizes having billionaires and letting them keep their billions over health care for everybody, over education that is as good in the south side of Chicago as it is in Greenwich, Connecticut. It's not a question of are billionaires bad people? It's we have made a very weird social decision to allow people to be billionaires before
dealing with these other things. I mean, that is the whole idea behind the idea of every billionaire is a policy failure. It is not every billionaire is the failure of parents to raise a good kid.
Not every billionaire is a moral failure.
And the other one had access to inside information that others didn't have. That's almost like the sine qua non of business. Right?
That's how you do business. But I also want to say, though, for what it's worth, I agree with that 100%. But I also haven't seen Stephanie Ruhle, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen her dedicate segments to saying that you shouldn't be, moralizing to the poor because they're financially disadvantaged, or doing segments on how people need to save more. So this, moralism rhetoric is
there's
quite
a
selectively applied.
Sensitivity
there's
to stuff.
Well, there's a lot of snowflakiness, but my point is in general, I'm actually all for it. I'm going to critique the left a lot on this. I'm across the board. Less moralism, less personalization, period, including for people that are my political, economic opponents.
Let's hear the second clip.
Allow most people to avail of the American dream.
I'm with you, and we have the same ultimate goal. But if what's happening right now on the progressive left is demonizing, is to say it should be illegal for Jeff Bezos to be that rich. He's a bad person. This person's a bad person.
See, wait a second. See, this is so frustrating because they keep imposing this thing that somehow Jeff Bezos is bad. Who cares about Jeff Bezos? Saying that it's should be illegal for Jeff Bezos to be this rich is also saying it should be illegal for Stephanie Ruhle and for Sam Seder and for everybody to be that rich. It's not picking on an individual. There's no law that's going to say Jeff Bezos shouldn't be this rich. There's a law that's going to say nobody should be this rich.
Bad person.
How are we going
Who said he's a bad person? I don't think Jeff Bezos should be a billionaire or at least have as many billions as he has. Who said he's a bad person?
But do you think that
my guess is, I've heard he cooks pancakes for guests at his house. I've heard he's a very nice person. That's what I've heard.
Do we?
That doesn't mean I think he should be a billionaire. And I'll tell you. Let's take him for a second.
Figure out a way to get those people to the table. Because if I turn on, let's say, conservative media, we run the risk that we're going to go down a slippery slope where Americans are going to say, hold on, are you controlling how much money I make? And that's not the argument you're trying to make. But if we allow a certain narrative, right, it's like, why is the NRA as powerful as they are? There's tons of people who are members of the NRA who want a little bit of gun control. But the NRA convinces them, well, it's a slippery slope. And if they take bump stocks away, they're coming for your handgun in 6 months. If we go on a hardcore argument that rich people got these gains through nefarious ways, suddenly we could hurt this argument where people say, you can't control how much money I want to make.
I disagree. And I'll tell you why.
No time left.
Who was the last
president?
Sorry. Who was the last president who actually did do a little bit of demonizing? FDR. Called them malefactors of wealth. He was one of them. He was a traitor to his class, which is one of the most noble things you can be.
President Obama did.
A lot.
That is
serious.
Unbelievable.
Are you
Oh
serious?
my God.
See, this is
Barack Obama literally
He
said.
told
let me
the
finish.
people.
Obama kowtowed so badly to this class. And what is stunning about this is that she has a daily television show. If she is worried about the wrong narrative getting out there, why not just go affirmatively and deliver the narrative that billionaires should be illegal, but they're still nice people?
I think the answer is ideology.
He met with the bankers.
He said he was going to
White
protect
House and
them
said,
from.
"I am between you and the pitchforks." Is the direct quote. And then she's talking about how in 2011, when he made this minute pivot, literally like, I'm gearing up for re-election and I probably shouldn't be talking about gutting Social Security and Medicare. And he went to Kansas and was like, we ought to think about paying people a couple extra dollars an hour and Why can't there be a private jet tax? I think we all could roll our sleeves up. If she considers that to be demonization, I mean, she is really on another solar system.
Well, she was raised in a certain ideology that is still dominant across the world and especially in the mainstream media, and she's showing it right here. The thing this clip reminds me of is a thing called imminent critique. Marx was big on this, among other philosophers, where basically what that means is by describing how something works in a factual way, any sort of reasonable or moral person will extract some kind of critique from it, right? So like he's laying out the facts and she's taking a moral judgment from it because she's like, oh, that sounds bad when you put it like that.
I think there's a sensitivity to realizing like this makes it really makes him sound bad here. But go ahead.
I mean, FDR called them malefactors of wealth. He was one of them. He was a traitor to his class, which is one of the most noble things you can be.
President Obama did.
A lot more tempered in his approach than FDR. He did not demonize at all. He talked about, we need to have regulation, common sense regulation, but there was not a going after. We have not seen Democratic presidents in the modern era go after malefactors of wealth, that kind of language.
I'm with you, yes.
And FDR used the political capital that gave him to actually enact a regulatory apparatus that served us fairly well in terms of finance for decades. And I think a little bit of demonization of people who are stealing the dream from people is fine. I think what you have plutocrats like Donald Trump doing is taking the real anxiety that many Americans have, and instead of actually leading those Americans to punch up at the powerful who stole it, getting them to punch out at Mexicans and other fantasy causes.
And then he's hooking up the powerful.
Correct. And stuffing his cabinet full of them right before they croak. And so I think what's really important right now is for a new politics in this country, not about left and right, but frankly about humanism versus plutocracy.
He's doing it pretty well.
Also, by the way, if Stephanie, if Barack Obama spoke the way FDR spoke about oligarchs, you might not be where you are because you had a stroke.
Right.
Like you would have a literal physically incapacitating response. I mean, but also it's what's typical too is it's like a caller who disagrees with you about something but just keeps moving the goalposts. It's like, first, all right, well, he got rid of the whole conflation of policy with morality. Well, but don't we all need to be at the table? Well, FDR did that. Well, so did Obama.
You can kind of see the gears turning in her head, though.
Well, that's what I was saying. It's sort of sweet in a way that she's like naively, there's a certain naivete, and there's also, I think, sort of like a realization, like you were suggesting, Jamie, that like she's realizing like this is bad.
She has an obsolete skill set in a way.
It's her assessing like this is bad, but I can't think that that's bad, and so I need to sort of like switch over here and project onto it. It is fascinating. I think we could be probably, I feel like 6 to 8 months away from Stephanie Rule, basically, Jamie, presenting different Marxist concepts.
Stephanie Rule, go on Antifada.
Hell yeah. She is welcome anytime, all right? And like maybe I'm just feeling a little bit more optimistic than usual today, but the fact that she had that reaction to hearing those things laid out, that instinctual reaction, like that's bad. That we can work with that because there are people who understand Marx and accept Marx's description of the world whereby all value is created by labor exploitation and resource extraction, and all labor is exploitation. And there are people who are like, yeah, what's the problem? That's fine. I'm on the side of the ruling class. So the fact that she had something of a human response to it is good.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's...
I think that project is pretty utopian.
I'm trying to be nice.
Boom.
Okay?
Let's go to calling from a 610.
Not as utopian as antitrust.
610 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Watch a snuff film. Relax.
Oh my God. 610. 610. What's going on? 610. Let's try. Calling from a 469 area code. Who's this?
Hey, it's Jose Perez, Dallas, Texas.
Hello, Jose. What's on your mind?
Oh, cool. Yes. First-time caller, long-time listener. Real quick, shout out to Michael Brooks. He's awesome.
Thanks, man.
But what's on my mind is, well, just, going into 2020, I'm a young Hispanic kid out here in Dallas, college student. I'm a hardcore Bernie supporter. And just, this past couple of days, I've seen the Democrats have done the same old thing, go after one of their own for expressing her opinion on AIPAC. And I know her tweets were a bit sloppy, but, with context, I feel like they shouldn't have condemned her for her actions or for her words. And those kinds of things, really turn me off from the Democratic Party. Like here, I'm involved in elections. Like I was a deputy field director for a state rep race out here. I'm with an organization here that knocks on doors and gets out the vote for working class Latino and brown people. So it's not really with the Democrats. We push issues like healthcare, immigration, education, and but I'm going to be voting in the Democratic primary next year, and I think my favorite Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and I think those kinds of issues will be popping up, and I'm not really over 2016. I'm still kind of stung, but I think those kinds of issues, keep me away from the Democratic Party. And
you are awesome, and I would just say, just on a positive note, I think the freak out about Ilhan Omar is also a really positive signal that this conversation is changing and the momentum's actually in a really different direction.
The freak out is? What do you mean, the freak out?
The tweet
there's
that
a defensiveness.
David Rothkopf said this, who's a very mainstream foreign policy guy. He used to edit Foreign Policy magazine. He said, undoubtedly part of why the emotionalism is so high about this is because they understand
it's white-knuckled. It's a white-knuckled response.
And also, I have to say, AIPAC using this to send out a fundraising letter, not good optics.
That is hilarious when I saw that. Oh, my God.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look.
As good a time as ever to raise money.
Look, I think I think the best piece. I mean, I enjoy seeing like Peter Beinart being scolding. Look, the tweet
Peter
was
Beinart
sloppy.
being on point.
Right, being on point. The tweet was sloppy, and there's sensitivity around there. There's a certain amount of politics that's involved with it. She's a freshman congresswoman, and so she's going to learn how to sort of thread that needle more. And yeah, the Democrats I think reacted more than they needed to, but that is like an area, like frankly, don't anticipate that Elizabeth Warren is going to be dramatically better on this stuff than your averge Democrat.
There's no doubt that she won't be. I do think, though, it's fascinating.
Well, it's not just a question that they're just getting money from AIPAC. They're getting money from people outside of AIPAC. There's also a host of other
there's
pressures.
Cognitive capture. I mean, it's been I know plenty of people who, I think particularly people who are a bit, older. It's the good intention default. Like, I oppose the obscenity of anti-Semitism, so I support Israel. And I think now that is actually part of what I mean by the freak out. The lazy default of that position is getting seriously called into question.
Really fast. I think the bigger issue for me is that, they think like young people aren't informed. Like, we don't know, different nuances of the issues. Like right now I'm taking a class that's a Trump supporter. He's 70 years old. And, we have a lot of different arguments, and he's very Fox Newsy, very talking point. And I have to break down issues to him. And I think it scares him because he doesn't expect it from a 23-year-old. Like, these kinds of issues, have a lot of nuances, and we're not just gonna see it for face value. Like, we're gonna actually look into it and call your bullshit out. Like, we have information at our fingertips,
Yeah, that is so important. I think I actually have to side with Amber Frost on this one when she said that progressives, social democrats, Bernie supporters, whoever, need to toughen up a little bit. And when they try this kind of disingenuous argument, just say I'm not here for your bullshit, And, you only say that to people who are doing the wrong thing, right? Because there are people who are trying to do the right thing, right? Who might think that this is something that they need to care about. But in this instance, no, they don't. And people should be unequivocal about that.
Appreciate the call.
Definitely, and I appreciate it. Appreciate
Thanks,
your call. Appreciate your time. This is great. I love your show.
What are you
Thanks,
studying?
Calling from an 804 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes. Who's this?
Hi, my name is Steve.
Hello,
I'm
Steve.
calling from Florida.
Hello, Steve from Florida. What's on your mind?
And I'm a longtime listener of the show. Love the show. Big progressive. And I'm just calling. I kind of hate to bring up the subject, but Sam Harris. And I thought you guys would be interested in a particular article. So, as I said, or may have said, I'm an environmental anthropologist, and there's a particular article about Charles Murray called Anthropology in the Bell Curve that kind of breaks down some of the connections that Charles Murray has, and I thought it'd be interesting for you guys. So basically, Charles Murray is connected with this organization called the Pioneer Fund. Yep. Basically, his whole book was funded by the Pioneer Fund, and the Pioneer Fund has an interesting history. It was funded by this guy, or it was created by this guy named Harry Laughlin,
right?
Who was a bona fide eugenicist, right? And he got his degree from Heidelberg University in 1937. So Heidelberg's obviously in Germany, so yeah, he was Nazi educated. So, you know.
And if I'm not mistaken, that fund was established to study basically genetics. So it was something like hereditary
and human differences.
Call it human
Well, it was all
biodiversity.
funded by eugenicists. It was created by eugenicists. It basically, you know, it was the hotbed or the intellectual, you know, core of the eugenicist movement in the United States.
I think it was also what they called big bundlers for the Bush campaign were pioneers too, I think, now that I remember. But go ahead.
It's lasted a long time. But yeah, I mean, the Pioneer Fund funded sending the bell curve to every single person on the mailing list of the American Anthropological Association, Sociological and Psychological Association. So they have some clout. They have a lot of money to blow around. And just the fact that Sam Harris, I don't know if you guys listened to that entire interview he did with Charles Murray, but to call it a softball interview is an understatement. It was more of a tongue bath.
Ooh.
But
I have had the misfortune of listening to it because of this book, and it's a fusion. I mean, first of all, it obviously is confirming all of Sam Harris's pre-existing biases, and not just on race, I would say, also on class, and also on the idea that really complicated, hard to understand things, without even putting politics on it, honestly, but just historically complex subjects can be reduced to some type of simple math, so you don't have to figure anything out. That's his quest. So if you follow the logic of what he's doing, even what you're doing by saying, hey, here's what the Pioneer Fund is, that takes a certain amount of historical research and contextualization and inquiry. Not only doesn't he do that, he's actually saying that any effort to do that is like fundamentally wrong-headed. So it was disgusting, and Charles Murray's the perfect person for that because he sounds very measured, and you know he knows how to speak in quantitative terms.
Yeah, he starts out the entire interview by saying, "Well, all this, you know, ad hominem attacks against you are just SJW BS."
Right. Well, that's the whole point why he had to have Mann, was because he wasn't having he wasn't getting a full airing of this guy's book, which of course not only was heavily subsidized, but was, I think, like a cover story on the New Republic that
It was a
Andrew
cover.
Sullivan put on when he was the publisher back in the days when Marty What's-His-Face
Marty Peretz was the publisher.
the bigoted publisher of that magazine.
And actually,
Yeah.
And Robert Wright said to me in a conversation that we did publicly that, actually everybody else at the time in the New Republic, even as centrist as it was, didn't want to do it.
Oh, yeah.
But Sullivan, he's like, we fought, but Peretz and Sullivan muscled it through.
Yep.
And
I
thank you
appreciate
for
the
that
call,
mental
Steve.
image, by the way. I'm sure it's only a matter of time now before someone sends us a Photoshop of Sam Harris giving Charles Murray a tongue bath.
If we get lucky. So the Green New Deal, like I say, is going to head up on the Senate. It's going to be interesting to see how people vote on this. We got a lot of, I don't know how many, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 6 of the so far declared presidential candidates have said they're supportive of the Green New Deal. There's a lot of stuff in there that we're going to see the right attempt to scaremonger with. And here is a little, this is a little teaser, I guess, of coming attractions in terms of what the Republicans are going to say about the Green New Deal. It'll be interesting. I mean, this is my prediction. All of these memes that we're about to hear from Senator John Barrasso from Wyoming are going to be ones that we hear in the right-wing ecosphere, but hopefully will be sequestered there. In fact, I think the more insane they get, because of the Trump effect, mainstream media is just a little bit more resistant to this stuff, a little bit. But here it is, John Barrasso giving you a coming attractions of all the things they're going to claim will go away if we get a Green New Deal.
There's another victim of the Green New Deal. It's ice cream. Livestock will be banned. Say goodbye to dairy, to beef, to family farms, to ranches. American favorites like cheeseburgers and a milkshake will become a thing of the past.
Fun.
Millions of American workers will lose their jobs. Living this green dream is actually a national nightmare. Just the energy portion of the plan alone would cost at least $5.7 trillion, and it's feasibly impossible. The government handouts, health care, and other giveaways will cost tens of trillions of dollars. This Green Deal will bankrupt the country.
Well, as you know, it's impossible to bankrupt the country because we print our own money. But aside from that, it's going to suck. I mean, why would the Democrats promote a get rid of ice cream deal?
Because AOC is sitting there and she's like, you know what I think is gross? Burgers. And I'm going to
You're
take
all going to be eating tofuti.
Yes, all of the political capital I have is going to be spent on wasabi tofu.
I want to trademark Soy Boy ice cream right now.
Are they going to get rid of puppies too?
That's next. No more puppies. Livestock will be
All
banned.
of the things you like. Also, I like the line coming from both Democrats and Republicans on this so far, because, Pelosi's not a huge fan of the Green Dream either, as we know. That's like, oh, yeah, we could stave off this coming apocalypse in 10 years that no one still seems to take very seriously. But, it'd be really expensive. We have to tax the wealthy, so maybe not.
I'm really disturbed, but I'm just seeing someone just sent me this tweet that just came in, and it's from the official Prime Minister of Israel's account. And the first part is he's apparently meeting with 60 foreign ministers and envoys from countries around the world against Iran.
Oy.
What is important about this meeting is that it's not in secret, because there are because many of those this must be a transcript of what he's saying. That is in an open meeting with leading representatives in Arab countries that are sitting down with Israel in order to advance the common interest of war with Iran. That's terrifying. And the Gulf and Emiratis are just as insane as the Israelis on this. This guy is a true menace.
Yeah, here he is. It's an audio. Come together to talk about in order to advance the common interest. This will continue. Where's the war part? The common interest of war with Iran. Wow. Well, no, I don't think he says that.
Well, AIPAC had to get something in return for its suffering.
Maybe if Ilhan Omar had not been so aggressive with her tweets, Israel wouldn't have to feel like they had to.
I felt so threatened that we need a world war that will kill millions because I was very triggered by that.
This was a fascinating story that I saw today in the Washington Post. Apparently, they've done an autopsy on the Republican carcass. And speaking privately to his donors, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy squarely blamed Republican losses in last year's midterm elections on the GOP push to roll back health insurance protections for people with pre-existing conditions, and in turn blamed his party's right flank. Now, this is funny for a couple of things. One, I do remember that Nancy Pelosi, at one point was like, let's hear it for pre-existing conditions. She was clearly aware of what was driving that last midterm election. And to a large extent, we saw a lot of people in a lot of Democrats, almost universally running on healthcare, and at least 50% of those running on a single-payer program. What's also funny is to hear McCarthy is blaming the party's right flank. This is the Freedom Caucus he's talking about. But I'm so old, I remember when they were all celebrating together in the White House Rose Garden, I believe it was, when they passed the first version, or the only version that passed. This was they tried to pass a replace and repeal. The initial version of that bill was withdrawn because of the Freedom Caucus and Republican moderates. Meadows and Representative Tom MacArthur from New Jersey, no member of the Freedom Caucus, crafted an amendment that would give states the ability, I don't know if you remember this, the ability to basically waive the protections that the Affordable Care Act provided, one of those being protections against discrimination because you had a pre-existing condition. So they are able to pass it. I should also say that MacArthur lost his election. And they were able to pass it, and this is the scene that we saw in the Rose Garden. They hadn't quite got it through the Senate yet, but let's watch this. Oh, it's Kevin McCarthy. Who's he calling up there?
Mr. President, what's your message to Americans with pre-existing conditions?
Just walking away. There they are, all very excited. Are they going to do any cheering here? What comes up next? That's just it. They're all congratulating themselves. They're all so happy. And apparently that did not work out so well for them. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 951 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey guys, this is Dylan from California.
Dylan from California. Where are you? What's on your mind, Dylan?
I assume that you guys are all socialists, or you identify as socialists in one way or another. Am I correct there?
I don't know if I would identify as a socialist per se, but
Sam only identifies
socialistic.
as a cuck. Boom!
Socialistic.
Sam is a cranky social democrat. We love him anyway.
Sam's a soy boy.
But go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering if there are, if we're assuming that like socialism is democratization of the workplace, if there are any like policies that you guys advocate for as people that identify as socialists that promote socialism in your own workplace or in other people's workplaces, and how that applies to your business or others, I guess.
Well, that's part of the reason why I'm not, I don't identify as socialist.
Fair enough. I did one time float the idea of turning MR into a co-op, and Sam reacted neutrally.
Yes, I pretended like I did not hear it.
That's hilarious.
I had
I would
to try.
totally opt out on that just so we didn't have to have extra meetings.
I've seen what happens just with the washing of the coffee mugs, so I'm going to pass on the co-op idea.
Yeah, I bought my own coffee mug for that reason.
I think it's an interesting. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know how much some of these concepts to scale apply navigating in like the sort of small business and the creative economy, kind of like people sort of like paying themselves and making their way. But I think it certainly affects some of the decisions that I'm not, frankly, necessarily going to get into. That are between me and other people. But yeah, it affects how I do. To the extent to which I don't really have people working for me. I have people I contract for a certain amount of services, and affects things. It also affects things with how, when I do shirts for my show, obviously the type of labor that's used, but obviously MR, same deal with that. Of course it affects things. Mm-hmm. But I think, I think there's a balance between, of course, you can't discard your values in your your day to day, but I also think that again, these are really about macro questions and not people's kind of small sort of day to day interventions.
Well, I think at the point
Sure.
where it becomes, I agree to a point like lifestyle politics are bad. The place I would personally draw the line as, a communist is becoming a boss. No offense to any bosses in the room, or a landlord, or a cop, anything that is part of this systemic structure that enforces private property. For me at the Antifada, we're lucky. It's easy to do it this way so far. We do everything ourselves, but we are a 3-person cooperative. We split the work 3 ways. We split the money 3 ways. It's been pretty good so far. On the macro level, there are laws that can be passed to encourage the democratization of the workplace. I believe Jeremy Corbyn has floated one in England that would give workers of every single firm of a certain size the chance to vote to turn it into a co-op. So that's
and then
pretty
the
cool.
government actually would issue the credit to buy the businesses. It's actually
There, we have a legislation in this country, and I wonder if it passed. I can't remember exactly who promoted it. Where
Tammy Baldwin?
I don't know if it was Tammy Baldwin, but if there are family-owned businesses that are being shut down, the government provides low-cost loans, bridge loans, to the workers if they want to turn it into a co-op. So expansion of a program like that on a bigger level.
And really, the one that the UK is proposing is super ambitious, and it's totally, again, it's actually another good example of, I guess you want to, it's not exactly a public option because it's actually very much in the private sector, but they're not obligated to do it. It's just, hey, if you want to take over this medium-sized enterprise, we will back you with the capital. And if you vote for it as a company, and that's actually another thing too, as far as ethical consumption goes, I don't completely discard it, but I also think it just kind of is what it is if you're in the supply chain. But one area that I do try to the extent I can, and I feel so bad I cannot remember the beer company right now, but I don't drink that much beer actually, but there's a beer company, you can go buy it, Dwayne Reed, that Richard Wolff actually told me it's literally workers owned in Colorado. So now I never buy another brand besides that. I love to put my money towards that sort of thing.
Appreciate the call. Is that sufficient?
Yeah. Sorry, can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Are there any policies that any of you would advocate for on the micro level that you feel would benefit society as a whole or as a cultural change? Socialistic policies. I'm sorry.
It's a new Belgian beer, by the way.
You mean beyond a single payer type of system, or nationalization of, let's say, infrastructure, certain infrastructure, or expansion of Social Security, or I think that we should have universal pre-K and at least one public college option free public college option in every state. I would also daycare. I think is frankly, if not, free daycare. I think we can do in a similar fashion to the way that we do free K through 12 education. I mean, is that what you're talking about? I mean, that's basically what we do almost every day.
No, I'm saying apart from actual policy changes or political changes on a micro level, or I guess what Jamie would call lifestyle politics,
people should watch the Majority Report every day.
People should become a patron.
Well, I do watch it every day.
There you go. Boom. It's already.
And there you go.
It's already had some success.
The things you do in your own life matter to you. But if we want things to have an impact on the macro scale, we have to do it together. That's why, bargaining with your boss is more effective as a cohesive unit than as one person. That's why climate change can't be solved just by telling individual consumers to eat less meat, because the bulk of the emissions are still coming from a small number of companies.
The French communist philosopher Badiou said, "Fall in love," because that's a space outside of market logic.
No, it's not.
Go enjoy
Sorry.
yourself. Badiou, I trust more than
appreciate the call.
He's a
you
heavy
should fall
hitter.
in love anyway.
No, I would sort of be thoughtful.
I think we got the call. I've been waiting for here.
Here we go. Hey, get off the phone with your
calling from a 705 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Vinny. I'm calling from Ontario.
Oh, what's up?
Yeah. So, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can. What's up?
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So.
It is you. Okay,
about the
good.
Green New Deal. I hear you guys. Talk a lot about that. There are lots of things with that where lots of people have been talking about. But I'm talking about like the premise itself of having a huge public sector intervention like that.
Right.
Yeah. Are you guys aware of some mainstream macroeconomic theories?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So have you heard of the crowding out effect?
The crowding out effect? Yes, that's a.
Yeah. Have you heard about that?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So basically, the idea behind that is, so when you have this massive amount of public sector spending.
Right.
Public spending within the economy, just of a huge scale, as is proposed by AOC and so many others.
Right.
What happens is it temporarily leads to an increase in interest rates, which, in the long term, when the economy corrects itself in the long run,
how does it lead to an interest? How does it lead to? Explain to us. How does it lead to an increase in interest rates?
So what happens is when there's because that's within the models you work with. Whenever there's an increase in investment,
how does government spending? How does government spending lead to an increase in interest rates?
It increases because it increases the demand for money, right? And the money
government spending.
Money
Wait a second. Government spending increases.
Demand, so
government spending increases the demand for money.
Increase in demand.
Isn't government spending an increase in the supply of money?
No, that's what the Federal Reserve does.
The Federal Reserve.
When the supply side corrects itself, what you get is a net.
Who sets?
Decrease
Let's
in
just
GDP growth.
let's just start at the beginning. Who sets the interest rates?
The Federal Reserve policy, open market operations does that.
Right, that's correct. And so, for instance, when we had that massive $700 billion stimulus, how high did interest rates jump in this country?
Well, that was during a period of quantitative easing. Do you know what quantitative easing is?
The quantitative easing came afterwards, but yes, I do know what quantitative easing is.
That
That's actually even more money being pumped into the economy.
Yeah. So in what
How
happened
high
was
did the interest rates go
the,
then?
The stimulus package didn't create a rise in interest rates because quantitative easing was a thing. But
So
in
wait
the
a second,
natural state of
you're
the economy,
telling
when
me.
you don't have that kind of
So wait a
intervention
second.
from the Federal Reserve.
Hold on, Professor. Since you're giving us a macroeconomics class here, so you're telling me that when the government spends $700 billion, if the Fed basically creates another $1 trillion, as they did in the quantitative easing 1 and 2, then that's what keeps interest rates low. But if the government spends $700 billion and you don't create another $1 trillion, then interest rates go up because the Fed decides what?
They're going to increase the money supply, which sort of creates an equilibrium.
So
because
when the government spends,
so
you're telling me that when the government, hold on, Professor,
environment.
I have a question. I'm raising my hand here. So you're telling me that when the government spends, the Fed decides to increase the money supply beyond even what the government's choosing to spend? Or are you saying that's the same thing? So if
I'm saying the Federal Reserve, it reacts to government policy in many ways.
Yes, it does.
And so in the case of quantitative easing, it wasn't just in reaction to the government stimulus policy, but it was also just to increase the money supply in general.
Right. Why did they do that?
You needed money, more money pumped into the economy after the.
Well, they gave it to the banks, right? So the government spent money. But the Fed makes the decision on the money supply, and you realize that when they increase the interest rates, that's because they're trying to tighten the money supply, right? So you're saying, what you're arguing is if government spends all this money, the Fed is going to need to tighten the monetary supply and therefore will increase the price of money, which is interest rates. Is that what your argument is?
Okay, well, the interest rate thing was only half the equation. So
all right, what did you do to your phone?
The interest rate thing is a big government program like that, all else being equal, so without quantitative easing, that would lead to a temporary rise in interest rates. And then in the long run, when the economy corrects itself, it would be at a lower rate of GDP growth. So that's the idea behind the crowding out effect. And that's why you see, like in Europe right now, they still have to do quantitative easing because their economies are so.
Well, part of the problem was that they practiced austerity instead of stimulating the economy like we did. But so your argument is what? So the crowding out effect happens, and then what's...
So the Green New Deal would accelerate that. That's my argument.
Would it accelerate the crowding out effect? And when the crowding out effect happens, what happens?
GDP growth declines.
GDP growth declines. And then what?
Yeah. And then that's a bad situation. That's what I'm warning against.
What happens in a bad situation?
Well, there's no economic growth. Economic growth is so minuscule that it has.
Yes, but I'm saying what
–
what happens in a bad situation? What does that mean? Does that mean that people don't have jobs? Is that what you're arguing?
Yeah.
The creation of more jobs
is part of the equation.
The creation of more jobs under a Green New Deal is going to create less jobs. Is that the argument?
Well, I mean, most of those jobs are going to be contract jobs. And
contract jobs? What does that mean? That you're going to be contracted to do a job?
With these it's a project-based system when you have that. So let's say you
as opposed to what jobs are you aware of? You mean as opposed to like a service a service industry job? Is that what you're saying?
No, it'd just be projects.
Projects.
Like so, it would be
infrastructure investment, things that would create economic activity. In other words, right? Like people aren't just going to be hired to dig a ditch and fill it up again. They're going to build something that is going to be used in a productive manner, correct?
Well, if you do a cost-benefit analysis on that, I assume, like you, I'm also saying if you do a project like this, it needs to actually meet an actual need that needs to happen. It needs to be realistic. The idea that by 2030 we're going to completely phase out all petroleum, all nuclear energy, and we're going to replace it with something.
What happens if by
pretty
20?
uncertain about.
What happens if we attempt to phase it all out by 2030, and all we do is phase out 85% of it?
I mean, it would be interesting to see that scenario, but
It would be.
even that is way too ambitious.
85%. What do you think of what's the proper ambition that we should have in terms of this climate crisis?
Well, I think, okay, so in macroeconomics.
Well, don't tell me about
we look at
macroeconomics. Give me a percentage.
Every lesson of history tells us that number one lesson that comes out of it is you cannot underestimate humans' ability to innovate to meet their needs to keep on surviving. You can't underestimate. You never underestimate that.
Hold on. One can also not underestimate one's ability to not use a phone correctly, because I can barely hear you. But are you aware of what the United States did in terms of its war effort, for instance?
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
You are. So you know the figures in terms of how much of our GDP we were able to, within the course of 9 months, dedicate to basically building machinery for a war.
Yeah. Well, what was that number?
40. It's about 45%. 45% of our GDP at that point was converted. I mean, not overnight. It took a year, I think, into creating those weapons for war. So, I mean, our ability.
I don't know I still don't see what your point is, though.
Well, you just
that.
My point.
Yeah,
is,
I said.
Do you want me to tell you?
Yeah. Just tell me.
You say it's too ambitious by 2030 to hit even 85% of those benchmarks, and I'm telling you that what we did in gearing up for World War II, in many respects, dwarfs what we're talking about now.
Yeah, but it's a different situation with war. War, there is a fundamental understanding of this is a clear objective we have, and we're gonna do that with something like Green New Deal.
So, Adrian, will you join
It's
me?
very vague. It's
Adrian,
very vague. You don't.
Well, no, it's not vague. I mean, you were able to tell me right away that you thought it was too ambitious, and you were very explicit on what goal you thought was explicit. It's very clear, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying it's not ambitious, but the consequences of it. I'm not saying it's too ambitious to be done, but the consequences of it.
Oh, you did say it was too ambitious to be done, but go ahead.
Like, let's say you create all these. Okay, so you're able to get on that complete. Let's say you are able to get that 85% target.
Okay.
In that situation, there's questions to be had. Would that be able to? First of all, would that be sustainable? What kind of jobs would emerge as a result of that? This huge government intervention, what effect would that have on the private sector? I assume it wouldn't be positive.
Well, you assume that, but you'd be pretty positive if you owned a solar panel production factory. If you owned a windmill factory, it would be pretty productive. If you did not have to pay the extraordinary amount of money that is involved in the healthcare because of the burning of fossil fuels, it would be productive in all of the huge amount of savings that you would save relative to what we anticipate the cost of further global warming will be. You could save money on your military expenditures because of the destabilization of the planet that would not take place.
There's so many.
It
would
would
issues,
create
though,
jobs in tech.
There's so many questions.
We can't even. Yes, there's so many questions. We don't know.
There's so many
of
questions
all
about the
I mean,
viability
when you
and
contemplate
the sustainability of
Adrian.
using that.
Yeah. I don't know what you mean by viability. The wind is going to be there. The sun is still going to be there.
Yeah. It's unreliable.
Well, no, it's not. actually. You should do a little more research now that you've finished your economics studies into the viability of things like solar and wind and other renewables. Plus, when you think of all the incredible technology that just came out of our pursuing going to the moon, and how many technologies that emanated out from that, all the questions are, we don't even know all the incredible amount of benefits that are going to come from it. We do know the costs right now of not doing it.
And that you're just proving my point from before, that you can't underestimate humans, the market's, the private sector's ability to innovate to serve the best interests of
So your bet
our
is,
survival
let
as
me
a
just
species.
get this straight. Your bet is we should not address climate change because ultimately there's a good chance the market may come up with a solution. However, what we've seen is the market has yet to do that, and we are already experiencing the problems of climate change.
The private sector has spent probably billions of dollars to keep itself from being regulated for exactly this purpose.
Vinny, what do you think of my man Elon Musk?
He's. I mean, I like him as a person. I like him. I think he's a good CEO. And a good point to be made there is when Tesla had negative earnings, their market capitalization was able to beat that of most major traditional automakers. So what does that tell you? That tells you that Wall Street,
all right, listen,
institutional
I don't care
investors
about that.
are able to see that this is where the shift, that this is a shift that's happening, and the fact that they understood that even overrid, any volatility in Tesla's financial settings. That's a good lesson.
Dude, Tesla's actually failing as a company. The only reason that they got decent initial valuation is precisely Elon is literally the king of government contracts. You got to research how he makes his money. And if that company survives, they're moving off Wall Street, and he will literally get funded by a sovereign wealth fund from the Gulf. Dude, you need to. I'm actually embarrassed for market arguments right now. I know people who argue things I fundamentally disagree with regularly who did better than you. Sad, low energy, come better next time.
Do appreciate your questioning our narrative.
My narrative was deeply reaffirmed. It's 2:15, Sam.
We're talking about Armageddon here. So even if fixing it did wreck the economy as we currently know it, and we had to find a new economic system, it'd be worth it, in my book, to save the human race.
You're just so Armageddon phobic.
I think you're underestimating Armageddon from a cap market perspective. Goldman responded to fast-breaking Armageddon startups.
Armageddon is an opportunity for investment.
I like Elon Musk as a person, though. That's a hot take. I was trying so hard to be respectful. Make myself laugh.
Here's Chris Murphy. This is interesting to me to see Chris Murphy come out and well, should we do the? I thought you had a heart out. Yeah, we do. We got to get going at 2:15. Shoot. Okay. All right. We'll do this tomorrow and Friday as well. I'm sorry, folks.
Are there any of these that can I get to these tomorrow? You don't mind?
No, you can get to all the Chuck Schumer one. It's honestly nauseating, but why bother with that right now? All right, folks. I'm afraid that's it we have for tonight, for all the time we have for today. I got a hard out at 2:15 today. We will be back tomorrow, and then, of course, Friday, and for more of our narrative infringing program going forward. All right, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught.